Gopi Jana Balabha Girivara Dhari Gopi Jana Balabha Girivara Dhari Jasodanandana Brajanaranjana Jasodanandana Brajanaranjana Jamanatira Vanachari Jamanatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Adi Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Adi Kunjabi Adi Gopi Jana Balabha Girivara Dhari 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 Jasodanandana Brajanaranjana Jasodanandana Brajanaranjana Jamanatira Vanachari Jamanatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Adi Radha Madhava Kunjabi Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Adi Madhava Kunjabi Jayom Vishnu Pad Paramahansa Parivijagacharya Astatara Satasi Srimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Gora Premanandi. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. We're continuing, and hopefully we'll complete text 33. And that's over here. Yeah. Okay. Text 33. Yet, even though the extent of the good fortune of these residents of Vrindavan is inconceivable, we 11 presiding deities of the various senses, headed by Lord Shiva, are also most fortunate because the senses of these devotees of Vrindavan are the cups through which we repeatedly drink the nectarian, intoxicating beverage of the honey of your lotus feet. So the sweetness of Krishna's lotus feet, or Krishna's form, Krishna's pastimes, Krishna's highest exhibition of his completeness in Vrindavan. We, the 11 presiding deities of the various senses, are also fortunate, receiving that appreciation, at least to some degree. So we've learned lots of things, and we'll hear a summary in 3 commentaries, Jiva Goswami, Sanatan Goswami, and a concluding little one from Vishwanath. We've understood from this section that the forms of the residents of Vrindavan are all spiritual. And those spiritual forms have potencies that don't require the assistance of material demigods to function, to perceive, or to work. And their consciousness is also directly under Krishna, all of their senses and everything. We learned that the demigods that are controlling the senses, they're empowered representatives of the eternal forms of those same entities in the spiritual world. We learned something about Vasudeva, Sankarshan, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha, and their functions in the cosmic manifestation, overseeing different aspects of the cosmic manifestation. From the previous 30 verses, we've understood reasonably well, at least, the material energy, Prakriti, and its relationship with Krishna. So for those who are not like the residents of Vrindavan, such as the demigods, they have material senses, they have material bodies. They're also under the jurisdiction of the personality of Godhead, but indirectly through other agencies. We heard yesterday evening that Dhruva Maharaj says the same thing. Dhruva Maharaj made this comparison between, like, before and after. The after is by the touch of the Lord's conch to his forehead, all of his senses became totally enlivened by the Lord's internal potency. His senses became fully spiritual and no longer dependent upon the demigods. And in contrast, those that don't have that same good fortune, they are dependent upon the demigods, the controllers of the senses. Same topic, 4th canto, 10th canto. We heard a little bit we focused on Canto 3, but it's also in Canto 2, the Virat Rupa. Virat Rupa is an important topic. It covers a number of chapters in the Bhagavatam, so it's an important topic. Not easy to understand, but an important topic. And the Virat Rupa cannot function without Vasudeva, the personality of Godhead, entering. Then the Virat Rupa can function, and so forth. Everyone's dependent upon Krishna ultimately. That's the idea. We've heard 3 different models of how our acharyas say, at least as far as how the composition of the text, one can understand it, what Brahma is saying in one of 3 ways. A really nice one is Brahma's just ecstatic. So he's attributing qualities to he and the other controlling deities that are not their qualities, but he's just ecstatic. So he is identifying himself, like one-to-one correlation between himself and the personalities in the spiritual world that are controlling the senses of the Brijbasis, which is not so. But he's just ecstatic, and he's speaking this way, and he's feeling this way. He's just ecstatic. Another is the mercy of the residents in Vrindavan. They're extending their mercy to the demigods. And by the mercy that they have received, the demigods are subsequently also receiving some of their mercy from the Supreme Lord. And therefore they, by the mercy of the Brijbasis, they can also experience to a degree what the Brijbasis are experiencing through their senses. So let's hear some more. Jiva Goswami, how is it possible to describe the glory of the people of Braja? We have become successful by having a relationship with them. The word tu indicates a different topic. Tu can mean but specifically they're all saying, this is a new topic. The Brijbasis, the ladies, and the men, and then then there's the demigods. We drink the sweet nectar of your feet in the form of hearing, seeing, and through vows of concentration on being his servant. Now, his is a pronoun. It doesn't say to whom his. We'll assume it's the personality of Godhead, his servant. The 13 devatas are, so the list we've heard several times. Brahma, Shiva, Chandra, the directions. Vayu, Surya, Varuna, Ashvinis, Agni, Indra, Upendra, Mitra, and Prajapati. However, Mitra and Prajapati, in charge of the anus and genitals, are excluded for being unsuitable and vulgar. Thus, the devatas are mentioned as 11. The 5 and the 5, the mind, intelligence, and false ego, that's 13. Take 2 out, you have 11. The deity of the feet, Upendra, is an Asheshavatara, of Aveshavatara, the Shakti Aveshavatara, of the Lord's supporting Shakti. So his supporting Shakti means he invests Shakti in Upendra to do things. Shakti Aveshavatara. This is a special devata according to some. Without the deity of Chitta or Vasudeva, the rest were not able to act according to the 3rd canto. Correct? We heard that one. Vasudeva also derives happiness in proximity to Krishna. Now, Vasudeva is the name of Krishna, but this is the Vasudeva, who's the controlling deity of Chitta, derives happiness in proximity to Krishna, the original Krishna. Because the cowherds are eternal spiritual entities of the Lord, it would be impossible for the devatas with material bodies to act as their sense deities. However, Brahma speaks by identifying himself and the other devatas with the eternal devatas situated around the Lord in the spiritual sky. Those deities of the spiritual world are empowered by the Lord. So even the entities in the spiritual world who are his expansions they derive their power from the source of everything, even his expansions. Padma Purana says, quote, the heavenly beings such as the Sadyas, Maruts, and Vishvadevas and their abodes are all eternal in the spiritual world. In the material world, these same devatas are not eternal. Paragraph. Because Vasudeva is eternal in both cases, as a devata and in the spiritual world, he acts as a devata of the senses, chitta, in the material world, but is not an enjoyer like the rest of the devatas. This is the analysis of Vasudeva's body. Meaning that the devatas, they also have a tendency to be enjoyers of Prakriti, and Vasudeva doesn't. He has no involvement. Since the cowherds are spiritual associates of Krishna, they are endowed with all powers. That is, they do not need sense devatas for their senses because they're endowed with all powers. This is indicated in the scriptures describing the worship of Krishna. Now there's a comparison. Just as the deities of anus and genital were rejected for being vulgar, the experience of happiness derived from the cowherd's senses by the material devatas of the senses should be rejected. Therefore, Jiva Goswami writes, the explanation of the verse is as follows. This is kind of like a summary. Brahma rejoices at the good fortune of the people of Braja by his temporary attainment of sweetness in order to praise their good fortune as being so much greater. By this, he makes his own aspiration firmer. So as the plunge into the sweetness, the ocean of sweetness of Krishna, these 10 verses, and he is just getting a portion of what the Brijbasis, so they're up there, and I've attained something through their mercy, and I honor them as so much greater. Or, Eka Dasha can mean, quote, incomparable 10 deities of the directions, unquote. These are famous in Braja. These devatas drink the sweetness of your lotus feet, using the cups of their senses with devotion and ability, headed by Shiva, who is the head deity of the directions. We come and drink here repeatedly your sweetness. It will be said in chapter 35 of Canto 10, Vadyamana Charana Pati Vridhai. His feet are worshipped, Krishna's feet are worshipped on the path by the devatas. So that reference is, the gopis are, they know Mother Jasoda is anxious because Krishna is late in coming back from herding the cows. So they say to Mother Jasoda, no worry. Krishna was just with the cows taking some water in the Jamuna River, and on their way back to Braja, the demigods who were observing them from the sky descended just to pay their respects to him and offer their benedictions. And that's the context. His feet are worshipped on the path by the devatas. So he's just being polite and receiving their worship, and he's getting benedictions, so no worries, he'll be here shortly. And he'll be blessed by the demigods. Now, whether they're having that conversation with Mother Jasoda factually, like at her doorstep, or they're in their hearts feeling vicariously Mother Yasoda's feelings of separation and pacifying her to help soothe their own feelings of separation. Doesn't, it can be read either way. Here's another verse from chapter 35. This has to do with Krishna's, the whole chapter is the flute song. Krishna plays his flute, and it affects different entities, different personalities in Braja. So this verse number 15 is describing when Krishna plays upon his flute, the demigods hear the flute, and here's what happens. Brahma, Shiva, Indra, and other chief demigods become confused upon hearing the sound. Although they are most learned authorities, they cannot ascertain the essence of that music, and thus they bow down their heads and hearts. Paragraph. What is the nature of that beverage? Now going back to the verse, that's honey beverage. The honey of his lotus feet. What is the nature of that beverage? Since it is most tasty, it is called nectar. Since it is most intoxicating, it is called liquor. Even those who are liberated, Amrita, become intoxicated with this liquor. Sanatana Goswami starts off the same. How is it possible to describe the glory of the people of Braja? We have become successful by having a relationship with them. The word to indicates a different topic, or is an ornament of speech. The great fortune of your devotees is in all ways infallible, achyuta. Brahma drinks the nectar of Krishna's lotus feet through the sense deities of the people of Braja. Now the sense deities of the people of Braja, that's the spiritual counterparts of the material devatas in the spiritual world. So they're getting mercy from them. Brahma is. And the other sense-controlling devatas. This takes the form of hearing his topics and seeing his feet to fix his position, Brahma's position, as a servant in his mind. The liquor of Krishna's feet is nectar because of its great sweetness and because it gives life to the highest degree, asavam. Or, meaning another reading that's from the Sanskrit, one can read this way. Or, the liquor of deathlessness, amrita, intoxicating asavam, even for liberated persons, it gives greater happiness than liberation and makes one forget liberation. Drinking even once this honey shows the superiority of the people of Braja over all other devotees. Paragraph. There are 10 deities, according to 2.5.30, and the moon is the deity of the mind. So 5, 5, and 1. There's different ways of, it's not, if this is right, then that's wrong. If that's right, then this is wrong. It's just different ways of looking at the same thing. You follow? Like an example, real easy one. In chapter 7, there's 8 separated material energies. You know what they are. You know what they are? Earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, false ego. That's 8. 8 separated energies. Bina prakritir ashtada. Chapter 7. Chapter 13 shows 24. Sankhya in Canto 3, 24. And sometimes 25. So it's different ways of looking at the same thing. If it's not 8's wrong and 24 is right, or 24 can't be right because 8 is right. different ways of looking at the same thing. Different ways of looking at the same thing. If you want to get from here to some destination, there's multiple ways to get from here to some destination. You can ask a friend. You can, check online and get a Google map, or get a, through Yahoo map, or, get a big map, a street map, or, put the destination in your little device, and it'll tell you how to get there. It's not if this one's right, then that one's wrong. There's just different ways of looking at the same thing. Like that. Get out a globe and get the coordinates, and you can do it that way too, three-dimensional. So, there are 10 deities according to 2.5.30, and the moon is the deity of the mind. This makes 11 deities. So just matching up the 11 that he mentions in the verse. Vayam, or we, indicates Brahma, the deity of the intelligence, and Shiva. Shiva is the deity of the Ahankar. That plus 11 makes 13 deities. Different context. Or the genitals and rectum with Mitra and Prajapati as deities are admitted as unsuitable. Thus, there are again 11. Or Prajapati can be admitted in the list since he is suitable for men and women in Braja who worshipped Prajapati to produce devotee offspring by direct worship of the Lord. But Upendra, who is non-different from the Lord, should be excluded. Then again, there are 11 deities. He's taking a look at how you get this number 11. There's different ways of looking at it. 11 deities. Though the people of Braja, with bodies of eternity, knowledge, and bliss, have devatas of the senses, they are not the material moon deity, etc. These deities also have spiritual bodies and live in Vaikuntha. Brahma makes this statement by thinking of the sense deities as non-different from the Vaikuntha forms, being thus shadow forms, or he merely takes an external view of the situation. In other words, he's not being precise. It's kind of... Padma Purana states that the deities in Vaikuntha are eternal. Same Padma Purana verse. It gives the Sanskrit. The heavenly beings, such as the Sadhyas, Maruts, and Vishwadevas, and their abodes are all eternal in the spiritual world. In the material world, these same devatas are not eternal. Padma Purana. Or a variant reading of the Sanskrit could be, experiencing the various types of sweetness of Krishna, Brahma praises the good fortune of his devata associates on somehow or other, sometime attaining that sweetness. Or, we, the deities of the 10 directions, excluding Nirati, that's number 9, that's the 10 directional deities, we showed that yesterday, and including the sun and moon, drink the honey of your feet, which is sweetness and intoxication, using the cups of our senses. And finally, really short, Jiva Goswami writes, "O infallible Lord, what can be said of the great fortune of the people of Braja? We, the 11 deities of the directions, are also fortunate. Headed by Shiva, we constantly drink through the cups of our senses the nectar and liquor from your lotus feet." He glorifies the people of Braja in 5 verses. So it's the 5 verses are part of the 10 verses. Again, it's just another model of looking at how everything is put together. So we pretty exhaustively covered text 33. And we're just waiting for what's next. Text 34, tomorrow morning. Tune in. I find it interesting and important to note that Canto 2, Canto 3, Canto 4, and Canto 10, at least those are references where we know there's an alignment, there's a thread of the cosmic manifestation and how it comes into being, and then how the spiritual world, this Vrindavan that's of the spiritual world within the material world works. There is a relationship. And we don't know the science of that relationship or what to speak of the technology of how it works unless we hear from authoritative sources. What to speak of how the cosmic manifestation works. What about even just our being spirit souls? We wouldn't know. When you're born, you don't know their spirit soul. You're not thinking, I'm a spirit soul. I can't wait to live out my human form of life so I can go back to Godhead. That's not how it starts. And so there must be some teaching and teachers. And the source of that, the Vedic wisdom, Aparushaya Shabda Praman. And so we're getting that, and the pinnacle of that Aparushaya Shabda Praman is Srimad Bhagavatam. It's the ripened fruit of the wisdom of the Vedas. Just listening this morning, Prabhupada was saying the dhatu for Veda is vit, V-I-T, vit, which means to know. So Veda means knowledge. And then there's so many branches of knowledge within the Vedas, this branch, that branch, name several. But there's a purpose of all of them. The purpose of all of them is to know Krishna. So whether it's understanding the Virat Rupa, or understanding the process of creation, or understanding cosmology, or understanding medicine, or understanding architecture, or understanding sociology, or understanding anything, music, understanding anything that's within the Vedas, there's one purpose: to know Krishna, because he's the source of everything. And how that which is the source of everything fits together with everything, that's part of knowledge. You may not get all the little pieces together, but at least one is to know Krishna is the source of everything, and not just like, okay, great, what's next? Not just emotionally or notionally, but by practical experience. Pratyaksha avagamam dharmyam susukam kartamaviyam. The Vedas culminate, or the ripened fruit of the Vedas is the Bhagavatam. And in this Bhagavatam, its ripened fruit is to understand the loving relationship of Krishna with his devotees in Vrindavan. The foundation, just like this house has a foundation, presumably, otherwise it wouldn't stand. So there's some foundation, and then the foundation results in, the house. And there's walls, and there's certain materials the walls are made of, and certain materials the doors are made of, and the windows are made of, but without the foundation you don't have a house. So the foundation of understanding Krishna Tattva, is found in Madhva's line. Lord Chaitanya's teachings are within Madhva's line. And there's a special feature of Krishna as the source of everything that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gives primarily from the Bhagavatam, or his teachings are the Bhagavatam's teachings, and the Bhagavatam teachings are his teachings. And that is, there's a very, very special kind of love of living entities with the source of everything, and we're being invited into that by Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement and by the teachings of his disciplic succession that gives emphasis to the special kind of love of the residents of Vrindavan. We're being mothered by the Vedas, by the Srimad Bhagavatam, to come to that kind of love. So when you get on a train, it's good to know where you're going. Otherwise, it can get confusing and get a little bit lost in the way. Are we there yet? So that this train is going to Krishna Loka. It's going to Braja Prem. That's the gift of Lord Chaitanya. That's the special, as a branch of Madhva's line, that's Lord Chaitanya's special gift. Starting from Madhavendra Puri, and then Ishwar Puri, then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and then his associates, and then us. And there's a big world of Vedas, or Vid, to know. And that knowledge awakens naturally through bhakti process, especially the bhakti process as nourished by the Srimad Bhagavatam and Lord Chaitanya's associates. That's what we're doing. It's slow and gradual, that's okay. It's good, it's slow and gradual. If it was really abrupt, we'd probably freak out. So slow and gradual. And as we go along, our faith should be, at least, our faith should be nourished, that we have good teachers and good teachings, and we're in good hands. And the soul is going to that place where it's Krishna's most intimate dealings are found. And Brahma is nurturing that in his prayers and so forth. And there's different stopping places along the way. That's also to be noted. There are different devotees that have different moods of love than the Brijbasis, and that's quite okay. What's important is the unmixed devotion, attaining unmixed devotion that each of them attain, and that's what we want to attain. We just stay with this Srimad Bhagavatam's message and Lord Chaitanya's associates, be followers of Rupa Goswami specifically, and that Braja Prem will be something that we'll come to feel. The potency is there. Just stay on board. Be clear what the destination is, and stay on board and follow. Okay, so let's see if there's some discussion. A little bit after 8 o'clock.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj. My question is about the point, the Vrajavasis doesn't have the material bodies, their bodies are spiritual bodies.
I'm listening.
Yeah. So, as long as one is in this material world, does they also need to go through the changes of material existence? Even though their bodies are spiritual, or doesn't need to be?
Mean the six transformations, Shadvikar, those. They, yes, but they do so under the jurisdiction of the internal potency, that is to say, to assist Krishna's pastimes. Yes, but to assist Krishna's pastimes. They're little children, then they're little boys and girls, and and they do what they do because it's assisting Krishna's pastimes. under the control of the internal potency.
I follow up to that, the body of a great spiritual personality. I mean, from the Nectar of Instruction verse, the body itself is a spiritual. So does it get transformed from material to spiritual by constant, touch with Krishna? That's how it works.
By
constant touch with Krishna.
constant touch with Krishna.
Exactly.
Yes. I was thinking about that topic just this morning, specific to Dhruva, because what we heard yesterday evening about Dhruva is his body became spiritual, but that's the spiritualized body, like the iron rod in fire, that acts the same as fire. It's fire. And then at the end of Dhruva's pastimes, as he's getting onto Vaikuntha Vimana, there's this light as his body became not just spiritualized, but spiritual. Now, exactly what that distinction is not clear. But the spiritualized and fully spiritual, that is to say, Bhuktir hitvanyata rupam svarupena vyavastati. In the language of Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 10, in the first 2 verses, there's a description of the 10 topics of the Bhagavatam. One of the 10 topics of the Bhagavatam is mukti. One of the 10 topics of the Bhagavatam is mukti. And the description of mukti, then in the few verses later, muktir, it's explained. The Bhagavatam teaches what's mukti. Muktir hitvanyata rupam svarupena vyavastati. Beyond aham brahmasmi. Commonly, mukti is thought of as becoming one with Brahman. Commonly. But it's incomplete. Becoming one with Brahman or Brahma Bhuta is incomplete. It's an essential step, but it's an incomplete step. Because when you understand that you're Brahman, then what do? What do Brahman realized souls do? If you don't know, if you don't have bhakti, then you don't know. But what do perfectly realized souls? Svarupa is one spiritual form. Vyavastati. Vyavastati is one is situated in one spiritual form, one engages in activities in one spiritual form. So that specific to the Dhruva story, that happened when he was stepping on the Vaikuntha Vimana and off he went, and there was this flash, brilliant light. It's similar to what happened with Narada, described in Canto 1, Chapter 5. Canto 1, Chapter 5. From the body that was Narada's previous body, like lightning and illumination occurs simultaneously. It's not lightning and thunder, but lightning and illumination. He manifested his spiritual form from that material form. So, that's like really high teaching, but, circling back to your question, there's the spiritualizing, and then there's the spiritual form. Let's consider Srila Prabhupada or Bhaktisiddhanta, or very specifically because Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in his writings, identified his spiritual form, a certain manjri with a certain name and a certain set of activities. His body didn't become that, but that's who he was. His body was doing what he was doing. But his spiritual identity was his spiritual identity. And it's gradually evolves, according to the intensity of one's bhakti and the mercy, the effort and mercy. That's the path we're on. And we're kind of like little people, way down here somewhere. But that's the path we're on. And there's a lot of mercy just ready to bestow upon each one of us, just based upon our eagerness for it. But we're holding on to the temporary, and that's a problem. If our hands are full, how are we going to take mercy? You have to let go of some things. But not forced, it just happens gradually. Otherwise, we'd freak out. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj. At the end of last class, yesterday's morning,
Yeah.
you said that when we hear all these details, we don't need to overanalyze.
Yes, I did say that.
But the essence is that we need to see the connection
Yes.
with all these details to Krishna
Yes.
and engage in watering the root
Yes.
in just Krishna's.
Yes. We try to understand, but not overanalyze. Try to see the connection. But to see the connection, it takes bhakti, not, a big intellect. There are people with big intellect that don't understand ABC. And the people that are really simple that can understand the big picture. So don't overanalyze, but try to understand, from your heart and out of appreciation, how wonderful is my Krishna. Just see. Like that. Okay?
Yes. And one more, this is a follow-up from the question that my Sunday school student had asked.
Okay.
So once the living entities go back to Krishna Loka, are there other living entities that can fall down from the spiritual
I'd
world?
rather not go there. The fall of the jiva topic has no end to it. I just heard a very nice explanation yesterday that according to Vedanta Sutra, and I don't know which sutra, but the speaker knows which sutra, the Vedas are silent on how. And second is the fall, placing it within time, according to Bhaktivinoda Thakur, is a misconception. It's the whole idea of fall being within time is misleading. And the third, from chapter 13, Bhagavad Gita, where Prabhupada is explaining the word anadi, he writes that a living entity in a conditioned state cannot understand this subject. And therefore, best, what the Vedas speak about and what this Sunday school student of yours should appreciate is, you're in the material world, now what to do? How to make that Krishna connection. Where other living entities arise from, that's found in Chaitanya Bhagavat, where a whole universe worth of living entities are delivered, and those, maybe it's in Chaitanya Charitamrita, the living entities that are not yet active already within this material world, because how many living entities they're innumerable, I mean, there's some finite number, but too many to count. And those are inanimate become animate. No problem. There's no shortage of living entities. So don't worry about living entities falling. Worry about becoming liberated. That's my response to this question.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. You mentioned that once a living entity is born, he's not thinking about his spiritual soul and needing to go back. But before, at what point does that change happen? Because Srila Prabhupada mentions that when the living entity is within the womb, he worships that I'm not going to to Krishna, that I'm not. I'm not, once I take a body, I'm going to worship you. I mean, something around that I'll come
I'm
back
aware.
to you.
Yes.
Yeah.
So how does that fit in with what I said? Because that seems to be contradictory.
Or at what point? I mean,
Well,
I guess. And
the soul, for starters, the soul has an eternal relationship with Krishna. At the time of birth, the experience is so traumatic. The trauma eclipses whatever sensibility of having a connection with Krishna may have been. And it's la la land. Then that soul that forgot because of the trauma of birth, etc., being covered by a body of ignorance, then knowledge needs to come to that soul so that soul can remember. Now, that the situation within the womb is the innate, his Prabhupada's description consistently is, after 7 months, the susupti state of the living entity is withdrawn, and the dreaming state, conscious living entity within the womb becomes conscious and starts moving like a conscious being moving, and it's really uncomfortable, more than uncomfortable, unbearable for that living entity. And so he cries out. When one is in difficulty, there, for a pious soul at least, there's a tendency to call out to God. So maybe impious people don't do that, but pious people may do that because it's innate. Because of the difficulty, you return to God for shelter and relief. Natural for pious people. 4 types of pious people render service to me, and one of them is distress. So that's the circumstance. It's innate. It awakens, prompted by the distress of the circumstance. Extreme. If the mother's uncomfortable, what about the living entity within the womb of the mother, Kash? And so many descriptions, packed up in an airtight bag, and et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you, Maharaj. One more, as you said, to get back into that state of dependence and liberation, one has to go through getting that knowledge from realized souls, etc.
Yes.
And you mentioned that there are stops along the way.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, there are so many distractions, and even while that knowledge is showering, there are so many things that take us away from focusing on it or paying attention.
Yes.
Is that what you were referring
Yes.
to? As
And there's all kinds of varieties as well. Meaning, supposing someone doesn't have knowledge in disciplic succession, there's some stops along the way there also. This ism, that ism, this ritual, that ritual, this tradition, that tradition. That's not exactly scriptural, but it's something in the direction of. So now back to if we're we're beginning the process of bhakti in this life, having received knowledge of transcendence, knowledge from a proper source. there's stages of realization along the way that we may think, for example, my distress has been relieved. I can relax now. In complacency. That's, stops along the way. Or something. I have this covering that makes me angry when people do something. And I get distracted because of that contamination. And I lose the focus on what the goal is. Let's just stop along the way. And then I have to repair all of that and get reset. So stops along the way.
And all that is part of the purification process, isn't it?
Therefore, stay on board, and know what the goal is, and don't take some intermediate thing as the goal. That, for those that are situated in proper knowledge. Or become discouraged because I have so much contamination, or whatever. The modes of nature acting, and passion and ignorance, and even goodness, getting distracted. As you said, but there's different kinds of distraction besides just the flickerings and unsteadiness of the mind kind of distractions. There's larger chunks of distraction.
Thank you.
Okay. Online?
This is from Atulya Mataji. Could the demigods of the senses provide more capacity to the senses of a devotee when one wants to serve Krishna more? I struggle with my limited capacity and my desires to serve Krishna. How to get more capacity?
Mercy. And it may be, more of an influence of the internal potency, like happened with Dhruva, as opposed to the demigods extend more capacity to the senses, or combination. So it's same effort and mercy. And, the one becomes eligible for mercy if the effort in devotion in the bhakti path is more of a focus on pleasing Krishna than just effort. It's like, your daughter's learning piano. And hopefully Radha's listening. So practicing piano is necessary to become proficient at piano. But it goes to a whole other level of proficiency if bhakti is driving that practice of piano, that Krishna is to be pleased. It feels different, and the capacity is also different. And it touches the hearts of those who hear it differently just because of the bhakti principle. But just practice alone can make one more sensory proficient. But it's not going to have the transformative effect, nor the satisfying effect.
This is from Snehavalli Mataji. Yesterday morning class, you mentioned that when Lord Vishnu is without his internal potency, then he is called Vasudeva. And when he is in his internal potency, then he is called Dwarakadish. Could you please elaborate on this? Is Krishna not with his internal potency in Goloka Vrindavan? We always hear otherwise.
Well, you're repeating something that I read, and yes, I did say it because I was reading it. And I'm a little confused by that statement because there's other references, specifically by Jiva Goswami and Paramatma Sandarbha, that Paramatma is always accompanied by his internal potency. The Lord is not without his internal potency. So what does that mean? I ask you, maybe you can research and find out, because you're good at researching things. What's the state of Vasudeva where there's no internal potency, because Paramatma is with his internal potency. Or say it the other way: when is there a situation where the form of Vishnu is without the internal potency? The statement I read says what it said. The Vasudeva state is without the internal potency. I'm unaware of that circumstance. It's not the Paramatma circumstance, according to Jiva Goswami. So I can't answer your question.
Rupa Vilas Prabhu, from 3:26:21, you read yesterday, in order to be situated in clear consciousness or Krishna consciousness, one must worship Vasudeva. Vasudeva is Krishna alone. Today we learned Vasudeva derives happiness in proximity of Krishna.
Yeah.
So Vasudeva referred in these verses is one of the quadruple deities?
Yes. Please be careful, as was mentioned twice this morning and once yesterday. Nomenclature depends upon context. And when you hear, let's say, Vasudeva used in this context means this, and Vasudeva in that context means that, don't get spun out. It's context sensitive. So his question, Rupa Vilas's question, is context sensitive. He's asking for clarification. But I'm just helping our listeners to not get stuck. And that's part of the overanalyzing tendency. If Vasudeva means this, then it can't mean that. But it can mean that, depends on context. So Vasudeva is a name, just as Gargamuni at the name-giving ceremony of Krishna, in the presence of Nanda Maharaj, one of the names he gave him is Vasudeva, as the son of Vasudeva, saying that this child of yours in the past was born as the son of Vasudeva more than once. So it could mean many things. Nanda took it in a certain way, but that's one of Krishna's names. Krishna in Vrindavan, one of his names is Vasudeva. So he's sometimes addressed during his Braja Leela as Vasudeva. He's addressed by other names too. But it depends on context.
This question is from Amara Mataji. We have learned that Krishna never leaves Vrindavan. In light of this fact, can you kindly explain how or why the Vrajavasis feel separation?
Why not? It's a mood of love. And a separation is part of love. Even when the gopis are with Krishna, they're anticipating, after some time he's going to be gone. So even their love and meeting is strengthened by their anticipation of love and separation. That's how important love and separation is. Or say it the other way, it'd be really, really boring. It wouldn't be boring, but monotonous if it was just there was only meeting and Krishna couldn't go anywhere because they don't want him to go anywhere. It's part of love. So they're feeling love, although he doesn't leave. Part of love. Separation. He enters their hearts. The aprakat feature is being manifest, and then later the prakat feature is manifest, and then aprakat, and then prakat. So it's moving their hearts in different varieties of love, in different intensities of love. It's part of love.
This is from Sri Radhika Mataji. How does the ability to reduce the tendency to hear in a way that filters out messages we are not inclined towards get refined or purified?
How does it work is your question?
How does that tendency to hear with filters?
Speak into the microphone, please.
Sorry.
You got it to your side.
How does a tendency to hear with filters get purified or refined?
Gradually. By the influence of the spiritual potency, gradually. And the gradually means the covering is reduced and the natural tendency is heightened. Gradually, that's how it happens. By the purifying potency and enlivening potency of messages of Krishna. And we're pretty covered, so it takes a while. But that's okay. Cleansing is going on. That's good. That's it. No? Okay. Prabhupada ki jai.